All right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies might have inspired it. But today on the show, we're doing something a little bit different. If you've been following my socials, you know that last month I was a part of an event at the East Las Vegas Library here in wonderful Las Vegas, their podcast summit, teaching people all about podcasting and tips and tricks and how to make the most of becoming a podcaster. It was an awesome event and got to meet a lot of really cool people and help some people out with some really cool knowledge about podcasting. And I recorded the whole thing. And the time that I plan on this episode going up, I will be somewhere in Europe, somewhere in either Ireland or Scotland or England. Who knows where I am at this very moment, but I figured I would take the recording of this podcast summit event and put it up as a special bonus episode so you could check out what we were all doing and talking about at this event. And it fills in some gaps for some content here on this show while I am away for 2 whole weeks, 16 days actually. This is the biggest trip I've been on in a long time. And so, hey, here's a little piece of advice for all you podcasters out there. Get some episodes in the can so that way you will always be set and don't have to worry about missing weeks, because consistency is very important when it comes to podcasting. But anyway, this episode, like I said, is a recording of the podcast summit and mixer that happened on Saturday, March 28th at the East Las Vegas Library. First, what you're going to hear is a panel with myself, Dayvid Figler from CityCast Las Vegas, Layla Muhammad, also from CityCast Las Vegas, and Al Mancini from Food and Loathing, and it is hosted by Jen Nails, and we get into all kinds of stuff about podcasting and our stories of getting into podcasting, answer some Q&A, all that kind of thing. That's up first. It's about an hour long, and then afterwards, I actually taught 2 sessions, classes, panels, I'm not sure what you call it, but it was just me talking to a room full of people about specifically guesting on podcasts, because I have guested on over 150 podcasts at this point in this 9-year journey of podcasting. And so I thought I'd share that wealth of knowledge with people on the hows, the whys, and how to make the most of being a guest. And so the recording didn't go too well on that part. So I'm just going to use one of the 2 classes that I ran, and I cleaned it up the best I can, but I didn't quite get all of it. But I am going to just include that at the end of this episode. It's just about like 20 minutes of one of the 2 sessions, but at least it's a little something from that, so you can hear a little bit of how that all went down. So the main panel, perfect recording. It's wonderful. Second part, not as good of a recording, but hey, at least you'll get to hear some of it. So that's what's coming up here. Hope you enjoy it, and let's get to the conversations.
And now I will bring out our 4 panelists. Panelist number 1, Dayvid Rosen, is a podcaster and award-winning music composer, as well as the manager of Wax Trax Records. Dayvid has produced a number of podcasts and has hosted the Piecing It Together podcast for over 8 years and 500 episodes. The ongoing podcast features conversations about new films' influences with guests from all over the world. He does live shows every month at movie theaters here in Las Vegas. You can find him on Instagram at PiecingPod. Put your hands together for Dayvid Rosen. All right. Panelist number 2 is Dayvid Figler, who was raised in Las Vegas and who the New York Times calls a defense lawyer who doubles as one of Las Vegas's most popular podcasters and cultural commentators. He has practiced law for 3 decades and worked as a contributor for the daily podcast, CityCast Las Vegas, where he served as host for 4 years. In everything he does, Dayvid Figler asks, where does chance land And how does grace fit in? You can find information about Dayvid at CityCast Vegas. Welcome, Dayvid Figler. And also with CityCast Vegas, Layla Muhammad is an award-winning audio producer and journalist born and raised in Las Vegas. She's the executive producer of CityCast Las Vegas, where she leads the daily podcast and newsletter production. She graduated from UNLV with a Bachelor of Arts in English and Economics. Her background spans live events and literary programming through the Black Mountain Institute and the Believer magazine. You can find her also at CityCast Vegas. Welcome, Layla Muhammad. Al Mancini is a 25-year plus veteran Las Vegas journalist with a primary focus on food and dining. He's covered Las Vegas and its culinary scene for numerous national and local outlets, including ABC News Radio, the RJ, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, and many others. He created the book series Eating Las Vegas, the 50 Essential Restaurants. You can find him on Instagram at Food and Loathing Pod. Welcome, Al. All right, so excited to dig in and get started. So I will be facilitating some questions and answers up here to start. And then we will save the last 15 minutes to take questions from all of you. So to begin, I want to pose to our four panelists who presumably were on the other side of the process, like some of you are right now. And I want to ask, from your beginning kind of aha inspirational moment to create your podcast to now fast forward here, 4 years later, 5 years later, 500 episodes later, what advice might you have or personal story might you share about how you began to move forward from that initial spark of inspiration? And anybody who has a thought right away can just jump right in.
Well, I'll just say it kind of ties into the panel that I'm going to be doing later, be our guest panel. Being on other people's podcasts has been a major kind of through point of everything I've done with podcasting and establishing myself and meeting all kinds of great people. I've been on these guys' podcasts a bunch of times, and it's a great way not only to grow your network, but also to just become more comfortable with podcasting and with being on shows and talking to people and putting your ideas and your information out there. So not to self-promote my thing later, but just wanted to kind of kick it off with that.
Thank you.
I would say that I had toyed with the idea of doing a podcast for a long time. I've done a lot of media. I've done just about every kind of media I can imagine. And when I was at the Review Journal, they brought up the idea of doing a podcast. But there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of hoops to jump through over there. I was already doing enough of that. So it never happened. And when I left the Review Journal, my goal was to create a restaurant guide called Neon Feast, to create some news sites that would support that. But I knew I wanted to do something where I could really just go back to the things I really love about journalism. For me, the most fun time in my career was 30 plus years ago doing college radio when I reported on the local heavy metal scene outside New York City, and every band came up to my station and I created the Food and Loathing podcast for a place where I could just have that, where it would just be the place where I could cut loose and not really have to worry, because I knew as a new entrepreneur, I was going to have a million other things that I had to keep really serious track on. Over the years, it has been a perfect fit. It has helped me develop ideas for my other projects. It has served as a brand that I could move other things under when I get sued and not being allowed to have them in other places. So it has been a catch-all for everything that I do, but really at the heart for me, it's the place where I can still have fun.
Las Vegas is a part of a network. So we're in 13 cities, and Dayvid and I were brought on into the company. But I will say something that kicked us off after our initial start, and I think this was like a few months in or a year in maybe, is we had a meeting and we sat down and really talked about what our voice is and what we provided to the community and how we were different from other news programs, and talk about like who our hosts are and what their personalities lend to the podcast, and we're really specific with that. So I think that helped us kick off and lean into who we were as a podcast and really get comfortable with broadcasting.
I started with my two loves, which were the law and Las Vegas. And I was getting invited to be on different podcasts when it was pretty new. And I always found the experience to talk about one of those two subjects. People want to talk about some of my cases, or I do a lot of work with people who are accused of crimes that involve their own problem gambling. And we had established this court, and it got some national press. And then I had done some other law cases with some bigger profile. And so I was showing up on podcasts, and I was finding that like people love talking about true crime, obviously. I mean, those are like the biggest ones. But also whenever there was a Vegas angle, people would be like doubly interested because we were just so inherently a character as a city, right? And so I would just, one podcast would lead to another. And I always found that the podcast experiences talking about those two things, but more Las Vegas, was always really super rewarding. And because it would be long form, very different than being like interviewed for a newspaper article or a magazine article where you really don't have control over like the narrative that comes out. So I was like, wow, this is really, really interesting. How do I get started in doing podcasts too of my own and maybe do one that was like all about Las Vegas or something else, you know? So not to suck up to you guys here, but when it first opened up, East Las Vegas Library, which is my branch library closest to my house, I did the podcast class, and I just thought it was great, just getting comfort around the board and understanding some of the concepts, and I was like, wow, this is really great. And then I love the bonus that you can then rent the room, you know, once you take the class. And I was like, wow, I'm gonna figure out a Vegas podcast. And at the same time, I was looking to see like, is anyone else doing this, or what else is interesting out there? And so I started doing like all this research. And while there are lots of people talking about Las Vegas in different pockets and stuff like that, I saw that CityCast Las Vegas. I don't know if you know this story, but I saw that CityCast was this like national company that was trying to launch a podcast about the city from the perspective of the people who live in the city. And I saw the initial list of cities, and I was like, why not Vegas? So I just sent a random email to the head of that company who had been doing a lot of press about his new venture. He was partnering with the people who ran the Washington Post for like 30 years, so I knew it was totally legit. And I pitched him on Las Vegas. And I said, you know, you really should focus on Las Vegas. It's really, and it's not me. There are so many people out here who, you know, love and hate our city in equal measure and can be both cheerleader, defender, and chief critic. And I think it would be a really interesting podcast because people do really love stuff that happens in Vegas, even people who don't live here. And next thing I knew, they started exploring Vegas as an option. They hired a bunch of people before they hired me. They hired Layla before they hired me. They knew talent. And then Layla and our former executive producer, Sonia Swanson, interviewed me, and then I came into the fold. And 900 and some episodes later, which doing a daily podcast, you wrap them up pretty quick. We had something that I think was very special for Las Vegas, and I was very proud to be a part of it and continue to be a part of it.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists for such deep responses. So I saw some connections between the idea of just going back to what you love. Al Mancini mentioned going back to the things that he loved, and then Dayvid Figler talked about his two loves, law and Las Vegas. And I wanted to pick up on that a little bit. So, you know, we can get distracted once we have our initial idea and our initial inspiration, we can get distracted by all the information that we don't know. We don't know how to run the board yet. We don't know all the technical stuff yet. You have your premise. You know the thing you love. You've returned back to this thing that inspires you that you want to talk about. From there, what tools, aside from the podcast classes at East Las Vegas Library, what other tools or other resources did you find helpful as you made steps to create your podcast? So now we're talking about like interview prep and just research on film, for example. Where did you all turn to sort of beef up your own knowledge of this thing that you love, but that maybe you need some more background on? Anybody, please jump in.
I think email lists of other producers making podcasts in LA, New York, West Coast, those email lists were really helpful. If you had a question, I could ask someone who's been podcasting for 20 years. And there's like LA radio email lists, and they're on Google, and you can find them there. But I think that was a really great resource to connect with other producers and ask them questions just starting, and finding a producer who can almost kind of mentor you and walk you through, like, this is what Reaper looks like and this is what you use it for. This is what Descript looks like and all of the intricacies there. And so I think finding a producer who can be in it with you and using your community is really helpful.
I think like internally, your own curiosity is like a really important tool for like longevity in podcasting. Being interested in the thing, obviously, that you're going to be podcasting about. For me, it's movies is my main podcast, piecing it together. And so I watch a lot of movies. I talk to people about a lot of movies. But then as far as like the actual podcasting, the act of making it, just trying stuff, like messing around with, like you mentioned, Descript or like any software or hardware. Just mess around with it. Be curious about it, even if you're not doing it for an episode per se, but like just mess with the tools and see what you can do with it. You can always delete it and just go on to the next thing. So like just doing stuff, being curious about how you can work with these things, and listen to other podcasters that are in your space, because I mean, that's that curiosity. It's seeing what they do, not necessarily copying what they do, but just seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and how you want to kind of work in that same way.
I think I was blessed to commit to a podcast where all the technical stuff was handled by other people. So my singular job was to show up and sound okay on the mic, which was a process, but also to be prepared really, really well. And that preparation is what I want to talk about and answer the question. But I also want to say that it really is a lot about the people you meet along the way. And I didn't mention it in the first answer because I just remembered it. But prior to working with Layla on CityCast Las Vegas, and we worked here for 4 years, I did a podcast with Layla over at Black Mountain Institute. And, it's just like you make these connections, especially in your community. They're really, really vital. You never know when you're going to run back into the people where you can collaborate again. And having just an army of collaborators, especially in your own community, is always going to be a very valuable resource. But also, if you do love the subjects that you're talking about, we at CCAST, we're a very general interest, but it's always about Las Vegas. I'm the worst of it, and sometimes, like Layla would say, that's enough, David. But I would go down all the rabbit holes all the time. Like, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting story. I wonder where that came from. Where's the original place where that came from? How did we even get called the Strip? Somebody said that this is the way, but no, I'm going to go find the original research and stuff. So I would do a lot of time on the library website where you search all the old newspapers, the RJs and the Suns and stuff like that, and find these great history bits. But also, like, just voraciously consume everything about my topic, which is Las Vegas. And so not just read the newspapers and subscribe to the newsletters that are all out there. Like CityCast Las Vegas has an amazing newsletter that's been run by two incredible writers, very different, but they tell the stories of Las Vegas. And we do our, we used to do these like little what we call the appreciation index, things that we love about our city or loved about our city that are no longer around. And just stuff like that just keeps generating new and interesting ideas. So when you do a podcast every day, you never run out of things because one thing always will lead to another, to another, to another. And I think that what I'll leave you with is just do what you can to maintain your innate and natural curiosity about your topics because you will never run out of gas. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was in a slightly different position in that I had a topic that I was very, very immersed in. I mean, and it's going to make me sound arrogant to say this, but I would say there are very few people who have covered the Las Vegas dining scene in the first quarter of this century to the degree that I have. And the more that you do it, and you work for ABC News, and then you work for the Review Journal, and things get tighter and tighter and tighter, and you're constantly trying to trim it down and get it to the keywords and get it to everything. And my problem was I knew more about the topics than I had any place to say them, right? So that's why I started the podcast. And I called it Food and Loathing as a tribute to Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing, but to that gonzo style, which is what I wanted to do is report on a world that I live in 24 hours a day. And I have for a very long time. So learning the subject matter and staying on top of the subject matter was not my largest challenge. My largest challenge was knowing how to do a podcast. I have a lot of radio background. I've produced radio specials over the years, but I knew that this wasn't going to be something I could do on my own. So I had an old ABC News radio friend who had been trying to get me to start a podcast with him for a very long time. I mean, this is a guy who's ridden on Air Force One with presidents and, I mean, he's legit, right? So he has been with me since day one. He's moved to 2 or 3 different cities. He always produces me from a distance. And then I reached out to my original podcast partner, who is no longer my partner or my co-host on the show, but Jason Harris, an incredibly talented guy. I believe he may have worked with Dayvid Rosen as well. And I said, okay, guys, this is what I want to do. This is what I know. Now, please walk me through how we do it. And I say all that to bring you back to basically what David Figler was saying. And it's about finding the people. It's about finding the right people along the road who are as passionate as you are, and then being able to go into it and create a working relationship with them.
Thank you so much. I'm going to echo the idea of finding your community, which I think was sort of a theme in all of your responses to that question. And just obviously, we are a community right here. So maybe you're sitting next to somebody that has information for you, that maybe you have information for them. So it's always so gratifying to find yourself in the right community. And I hope that people are able to make some connections today. I also wanted to just echo what Dayvid Figler said about just follow your own curiosity, and like the freshness and enthusiasm that you have will, what did you say? You'll never run out of gas, I think you said. Yeah, so I love that bit of advice. I just wanted to repeat that. Moving right along, so, there's such a, the deepest well of information that we can get from these experienced panelists. And I'm gonna go ahead and just sort of ask a general question. I would love to know if you could please share a growth moment that you had, something that didn't go how you wanted it to go, whether it was prepping for an episode or the editing process, was very challenging in some way or another. How did you remedy the situation? How did you learn and then therefore improve upon that specific process in making your podcast? So a struggle, we would love to hear how you overcame.
Yeah, I'm interested if it's going to be.
Not at CityCast Las Vegas, actually. On the first podcast I worked on at Black Mountain Institute, Black Mountain Radio, we did a segment about sign spinners. And there was a art exhibit at the Barrick Museum at UNLV on sign spinners. And so we did a podcast segment about it. And we did a long interview with the artist and some spinners, and we got all of this field tape, and we were just out there recording and recording and recording. And when me and my producer brought it back to our senior producer, she was like, where's the through line? Where's the story? Like, where's the beginning and the end? And what's the narrative here? And we had so much tape that we were like, okay, we have to go through all of this tape and find like what narration comes after the other and what interview comes next and where all of this field tape comes in. And we realized we kind of went out there and we're just recording, and with no real plan of what the segment was going to sound like in the end. And our senior producer said, you have to have a clear, solid vision of what the segment will sound like or what the episode will sound like before you record anything. And we went back in and recorded some narration and some extra interviews with that idea in mind of what this was going to sound like. And we were able to work in a lot of the field tape and a lot of the previously recorded tape, because we were like, oh, okay, this is what we have recorded, this is what we need, this is what we want it to sound like. So going into recording with knowing what you want the episode, what you want the segment, what you want your show to sound like, that was a really great learning moment for me, and helped plan, before you just start recording anything.
Before Al jumps in there, I just want to remind myself and everybody that sometimes there's a struggle that you don't even know that you're going to come upon it, but it's just like continuing forward anyway, and then coming out better for having gone through that struggle.
Exactly.
Sorry to cut you off, Al.
No, I find that really interesting, because I came to podcasting from almost the exact opposite point of view. I came from traditional journalism where, yes, absolutely, everything you do, you go get your quote because you're finding the quote that fits this part of the story, right? And what I missed was long, open conversations with people that had a lot more chance to develop. And I saw in podcasting the opportunity to do that. However, I came from a very structured world where I use podcasting as a way to open myself up. When I hear people who are doing podcasting first, I often hear people who have never structured, and they're purely opening themselves up. And then that leads to exactly what we were hearing about over here. So I think that there is a beauty in podcasting, that you have a longer attention span from people, but you still have to keep that attention span. And you have more freedom with your guests, but you still want your guests to think you have a reason for having them there. And there's a balance between those things that I think is unique to podcasting. And I think that as you do it more, you'll find where it works for you.
Thank you.
When Layla said field tape, I got hives, because we know at CityCast, we don't do it anymore. We've tried. It's so hard to just go somewhere and pick up sound and talk to people and get the sense of it, and then translate that back to a more structured podcast. And CityCast, I think, definitely benefits. We're a short podcast. Typically will come in about 22 minutes. That's sort of the average. Sometimes they go a little longer depending, sometimes a little bit shorter, but not much. And they're very, very structured in our preparation. While they're open to spontaneity and following the paths of where you go with your guests, we do have well ahead of time a structure of where we will want to go, what the narrative is going to look like. I think that the challenge is, well, first of all, let me just flip your question around a little bit and say one of the things that's really good to have in your life, and we had it systemically because we're part of this very huge network that has well over almost probably a couple hundred employees throughout the network now. We would have a content director who would meet with us on a regular basis and tell us what was working, what wasn't working, what we might want to think about improving. Sometimes we'd have special sessions with our content director, with other people in the network, to improve upon the stuff that maybe is a little weak and amplify the stuff that was definitely working. And so to have somebody who can be truthful with you and thoughtful, but also know their stuff, is a real good benefit. The challenge that immediately popped in my mind, like you said, we record, we have a podcast every day. Not every guest is the best, right? And sometimes you can try a million different angles to get something out of that person that people are going to want to listen to, that's going to be compelling, that they're not going to just turn it off. And sometimes it just doesn't work, and you have to be okay. And we've only done it a couple of times, but scrap. Just, you don't have to air it just because you have the space. You could put something else in there or pivot really quick. And then the other challenge is, early on in the podcast, I have a very good contact list on my phone, and we call up people and have them come on who are very, in the news or who had some really good perspectives. And I was always maybe a little nicer to the people that I like or who I know or my friends who I didn't want to piss off in any way. And
really, I'm the opposite.
Yeah, see, and so we'd have like the mayor or senators or whatever on our podcast because we do a lot of news, and maybe I was a little soft, maybe a little kid gloves. And early on in the podcast, our content director was like, you have to feel comfortable with the pushback. You're not, they're your friends. They're always gonna be your friends. If you ask them a hard question and they're no longer your friend, they probably weren't your friend to start with. It's like, okay, I get it. And so we, at CityCast, if you listen to it, whether it's a cultural episode, it could be an episode about food with Al, and Al's been on, David's been on, we always try to have at least one or a couple of questions that we call our pushback. It's like, yeah, but, or I get that. However, it's like, why did you do that? Like, really explain to me like I'm an 8-year-old because I'm not understanding why you did that, Senator. Those make for really compelling listening. And not doing it was, I think, the mistake that I learned afterwards, listening back to some of those early episodes. It's like, I just missed it, and I learned from that.
That's such a great point, and I want to sneak right in there. So, and I want to hear from Dayvid Rosen about the question of what was a struggle that you encountered. But David Figler, and for anybody else, and I'll go back to Dayvid Rosen for that other answer, but how do you strengthen that muscle of going maybe, cautiously into difficult conversations with somebody in your podcast?
I'd like to hear Layla's answer because she's producing it. Our producers are right there and they see it happening in real time. Yeah. Like, watching the slow motion of what's happening and then they pop in your ear. And so how do you?
I think for hosts, it's practice. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. But also being okay with the silence. And if you ask them a hard question and they fall silent, that's fine. Live in that silence. You can.
I once had a producer tell me, ask them the question that's going to piss them off. Just leave the microphone on when they walk out of the room because that's going to make good tape.
Then you'll get something. But you be okay with like them falling silent, or if they, be prepared if they're going to push back on you. And that dialogue is what we want to capture. That moment of like them thinking sometimes, and that silence, that like kind of impregnated pause is good episode. Is a good like tape. We want to listen to that.
Yeah, and I would add to that. I mean, it's either going to be good or it's not. It's not the end of the world if it's not good. So you're probably going to have a whole schedule of other people you're going to be talking to. The big guys aren't that much more exciting than everybody else.
So nicely said. The big guys aren't that much more exciting than everybody else. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Dayvid Rosen, did you want to speak about struggles?
I mean, I'll just say quickly, in the early days, the main problem I would ever have would be computer related because computers suck. And so really you just got to check everything when you are running into some kind of issue like that because I was so sure it was back then there wasn't all these Squadcast and Riverside and all these different long distance recording services. So I was so sure it was the chintzy one that came out of nowhere that nobody's ever heard of even at this point. I was sure that was the problem, but it turned out it was my computer. It wasn't the problem of the thing, so we cursed that thing for no good reason. We should have been cursing my computer. But anyway, check everything because your problem might not be the thing that you think it is.
I've done 250 episodes of this podcast, and yet when I guest on other podcasts, I still can't get my microphone on my laptop to sound good on their podcast. I have bought expensive equipment, and I bought all sorts of stuff, and I still don't know how to do that. So
there was somebody sitting there.
Thank you. So yes, humbling to hear that you all who have been podcasting for years are still learning, experiencing challenges, growing, all of that. Thank you. I want to move forward with another question, and I'm also checking in with Ms. Kat. We're good. 5 minutes? 5 minutes before the Q&A with the group. Okay, so let's just say that us over here, we know our subject, we love our subject. Somebody's phone is ringing. Hello? Let's do this.
It's a call-in
Let's do
guest.
this. Yeah, it's a call-in guest. We're live. Hello, you're live. Okay. So, we know our topic. We love our topic. We're researched. We have a couple experts who are acting as mentors. We're kind of poised and ready to take the first step to do our first recording. What should be top of mind for us? If we're able to let go of a lot of the worries, what would be one of the most important concerns or focuses that you would recommend that we keep in our brain as we take that first step?
It's the corniest answer in the world, but have fun. That's really it, because from episode 1 to episode 500 and beyond that, I mean, if you're not having fun with it, why are you doing it? There's plenty of other things you'd be doing with your time.
If you're someone who has guests on your podcast and they're not a regular guest, so not like your co-host or your best pal who you josh about, whatever, I found that the best way to do a podcast with somebody, especially someone who's not used to your podcast or hasn't been on before, is to adequately get them in the right mindset before you start recording. And you can have, first of all, you kind of set it up. And ours is an edited podcast, which I highly recommend because they sound so much better. I mean, if we were just to do raw tape, oh my God.
That's what I do.
Yeah, well, you can pull it off and God bless. But, we had a rule. It's if you go, and our podcasts go maybe 18 minutes, 22 minutes, maybe 30 at the outset. If you're over an hour of tape, first of all, it is not a good budget of time, and I got that pushback from my producer. Are you kidding me? We have to cull it down. But more than anything else, get all that out of the way in the beginning. You can talk to the person. 'Cause a lot of people come to your podcast and they're all very, very serious and okay, I want to sound great, I want to be at my best, and they overthink it and they're way too nervous and they're way too tight, and it takes way too long to warm them up once the podcast starts. So a neat little trick that we do is we go, look, we're an edited podcast. If you say something wrong, no big deal. We'll just go do it again. Don't worry about getting it absolutely perfect. Or if there's something you don't know and you're ooh, I want to look it up, we'll take a second. Go look it up. We're right here. And then also just, even as simple as what did you have for breakfast? Layla's favorite question. Before you even get started. Yeah, it's a sound check, but it's also just chatting and getting on that human level with another person. That will make your podcast 1,000 times better because that connection doesn't have to ramp up. It's there right from the get-go, and your conversation only gets better from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're all research, you have your plan in mind, you're ready to do this. Leave room and be ready to accept something spontaneous happening. There might be something in the conversation that you're not expecting. Go into that, ask more, lean into that. That could be a really fun moment on the podcast and be something that you don't expect, but could be the highlight of your episode. So leave room for, moments that you're not expecting and be spontaneous while having your plan in mind and being prepared for anything that might happen during your recording. And of course, make sure you are recording. Make sure your tech is all working and you press record and all that is up and going.
Yeah, that sucks when you realize you didn't record the whole thing. I've done that with some rock stars over the years. It's really bad. Everything that everybody just said here is absolutely correct and brilliant. For me, I think I try not to edit my podcast interviews that much. We do it's supposed to be 60 minutes. We do about 75 minutes a week. Usually average about 5 or 6 guests plus a lot of chatter between the hosts. So our longest interview would be maybe 20, 25 minutes. I try to let all of my interviews run in their entirety for one specific reason, and that is I don't want guests to feel like I'm going to sensationalize one line, right? I want people to hear what they say in context. I feel like I owe them that. So that's the reason I try not to edit. But I always tell them, yes, I can edit this out if you guys forget something, if you get something wrong. So it's super important about making them feel comfortable. But the one thing that I have told many people, for me, it's about realizing that you are driving the interview. It is your show. It's as if you're on the back of a horse or if you're a surfer riding the waves. You need to respond to what is in front of you, but you are driving it. And that means it's your job to keep them moving. It's your job to get a little more out of them. It's your job to pace it, and it's your job to know when to back off. And that is really the key. It doesn't matter if they speak too long. It doesn't matter if they're quiet. Your job is to keep this rolling in a way that people want to listen. And I think that that's where you have to get your mindset.
And Jen, I just want to make one quick point about editing. It is a trust relationship with your guests. You cannot screw them over. You have to be upfront and honest. We always tell people, look, we're going to edit, we're going to make you sound brilliant, but we're never going to take things out of context. We're never going to put things where they don't belong. We just want to make the podcast sound very, very good, and our guests feel comfortable that they were presented in the way that they intended. And that is about trust and building trust, and that's how you get people to come back on your podcast. Never screw people over in the editing, but we do find that editing makes stuff just so much better. I think Dayvid would agree and Al would agree that you guys always
he sounds
sound
better than me, definitely. Their podcast sounds better than mine, by all means.
But the podcast definitely benefits because we know what it's like in the raw cuts, and then when we hear it, I'm just like, wow, really everyone sounds great, and that's because you have brilliant editors who are making it happen. But that, I want to make that point. It is trust, and we do subscribe to journalistic ethics on our podcast. All the rules of professional journalism apply to podcasting and should. It's voluntary to do it, but it's important.
Thank you so much for all of those wonderful reminders and jumping off points for all of us over here. And as we move into our Q&A, I want to point out that we're lucky enough to have 3 podcasts represented here, more than 3, but 3 prominent ones that we're sort of focusing on today. CityCast, Piecing It Together, Food and Loathing, and they're all very different structures. So we have the longer 60 to 75 minutes, they're just talking about food, interviewing restaurateurs, talking about different hot spots in Las Vegas to go check out the menus. And then we have CityCast, much tighter in terms of they edit it before they release it, shorter, 20 minutes. And then we have Dayvid Rosen, who does go out and what do you call that? You said field
interviews.
Field interviews. So Dayvid records at movie theaters. So what a great
and actually my podcast usually has about 5 or 6 field interviews in each episode.
Thank you.
And I would say to you that if you are in a field where you are out at the things that you love, there is nothing better than the recording on an iPhone. I mean, it is so much better than anybody believes it is. And I interview chefs, and you don't want to walk into a restaurant carrying a lot of equipment, but when the chef comes to the table, hey man, can you tell me, what?
Yeah.
So carry that, always be willing to ask people things.
So you have this cool buffet of different podcast structures to choose from when you're thinking about your questions that you want to ask. So let's go ahead and do that. So please keep your questions, if possible, keep them general enough to where others might also have the same question. If you have personal questions about your podcast and your own process, maybe we can save those ones for when you're in the smaller groups. Who has a question to start? Right over here. Why don't you say your name and then go ahead and ask your question.
Hi guys, thank you so much. My name is Mika, and my question is, I get that you guys have, the host and the producer, but wonder if you're doing everything. How do you keep that balance going? As you guys have had several years, being kind of successful, but I know it started somewhere.
And I produce and host my show, Piecing It Together. I produce other shows as well, but for my own show, it's just me. And it's just balance. You got to balance with everything else, because assuming we all also have jobs too, we're not just making it all off of podcasting. It's just about balance and figuring out what are the important parts of this to spend my time and energy on. I mean, obviously being an attentive host that like puts on a good show kind of has to be pretty high up in the list, but then also all the planning, all the editing, all the putting it out there. You got to just figure out where you want to put your time. Social media, which quite frankly is just terrible. But yeah, figuring out that balance is important. And there's unfortunately there's no right answer to what that balance is. And it's shifted for me over the years. At first, I was putting everything into social media, and then I was, talking about guesting on podcasts. I've been spending so much time on that over the last few years, and on trying to be a good host. So it's like all shifting constantly, but you do have to like just keep in the back of your mind that there are all these roles, and congratulate yourself that you are doing all of those roles, and just figure out that balance along the way.
I think also if you know your podcast is 15 minutes, then try not to record for an hour, because that's going to take you even longer to edit and mix, and be realistic with how much time you have in your day. And also, I did a time audit of myself with how long it takes me to mix an episode, how long it takes me to edit in Descript. And so doing that and seeing where you're spending your time and how you can cut that down and where you can get faster, that really helped me.
Thank you so much for those responses. Very valuable. Let's go. I see you. I want to go sort of in the back. Anybody back here? Question. Right over here. So go ahead and say your name and then ask your question.
My name is Margot. How do you balance being authentic and strategic? Because we all would like to make money off our podcast eventually, and sometimes the being authentic kind of goes in the backside and the business side comes in. How do you balance that?
I never set out to make money off my podcast, thankfully, because that would have been a bad idea. But one thing that I've done, other than it being the place where I feel safe and I can play and I can have a lot of fun, is I have figured out ways to then monetize my podcast interviews on the other products that I do, right? So I have Neon Feast, which is where, chefs tell us their favorite restaurants. So I use my podcast to ask them some of that, and it helps Neon Feast. With AI being out there now, and the fact that you can have Otter AI transcribe your interview in a very short period of time and look at it, you can then find ways to write those articles. I have my own outlets where I use them, but if you do a great interview, find a magazine that might want to have you turn that interview into an article. Utilize the AI that's out there to make it easier. Don't let AI write your article for you, but utilize that. And maybe you'll find some ancillary ways to make revenue off what you're doing.
I completely agree with that, by the way, because the number of podcasts that make a lot of money just from the podcast is pretty small. But once you start factoring in all these other ways that you can bring in some income from the other things you do, from the connections you make, from Patreon, like all these different kinds of things that are all different revenues streams that could possibly kind of come together into making something significant.
Yeah, you are all presumably experts in the field of what you are talking about. And you are then going out and interviewing people who know more than you do. Whether you're a professional journalist or not, that is an incredible perspective to have, to be able to take to a national magazine and say, would you like an article on this?
I think also leading with authenticity and seeing, look at your episodes and which one performed well, then you can lean into that topic or lean into what was that, and you can still be authentic while trying to monetize your podcast.
Thank you so much. I want to have time for at least one more question. If not two, I'm going to go way in the back. And I feel like Sally Josie Raphael. Say your first name and then go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. My name is Pondell Glover. I was just curious, when you're speaking of revenue sources, where are you talking about? Sponsors? And how are they approaching you? Are you soliciting? How do the revenue come about?
Well, there's so many different ways, and I'm not sure how everybody here is actually making money. But yeah, the sponsors is an example, which it would be a matter of networking and finding connections with stuff like that. There's also ad networks that, depending on the size of your show, you might be able to get involved with. There's Patreon, like I mentioned, if you've got some listeners who want to actually become a member. But then there's also maybe if you do other things, like he was talking about journalism, whatever it is that you do, your show could lead to new opportunities for that. I started as a music composer before I ever got into podcasting, and so I have actually been hired to do music for people who have been on my podcast or people whose podcasts I've been on. So it's like they're not paying me to do my podcast, but I got gigs because of the podcast.
Thank you.
We have, we're fancy, so we have a ad executive who sells ads.
That's nice.
And that is nice. And so she's out there hustling every day trying to explain to people why. And, she has information about our podcast. And she says, here's why you would be a really good fit for this podcast. And then there's different fee structures. And sometimes the hosts have to do an ad, a live ad. So I'll do a live ad I'm sure everyone here listens to national podcasts. We get a bunch of those national ads as well, and we're doing them and we're localizing them, and so you hear my voice pitching whatever it might be, or local stuff. Like I love doing pitches for like Neon Museum. They come on they buy ads and stuff like that. The one thing that's important to us is that we never will do ads, going back to the authenticity question, that we don't believe in. I'm not gonna just for a couple extra bucks for my podcast, I'm not gonna sell stuff that makes you sick, or cure-all measures that are just junk. I'm not interested, and I will tell our ad people, it's like, I appreciate that they want to ad, but you don't get me to do that. And I think that's really important to have your moral code in there as well. Money is great, but you don't want to sacrifice the integrity or the authenticity.
Yeah, podcasting seems to be a world that is a lot more open to personal testimonials as advertising, and that's great. There's a lot of forms of journalism where that's just frowned upon, but if you're going to do that, then you better realize that whether you're getting paid or not, people think this reflects who you are. You don't just want to be a gun for hire.
I mean, I love my Aura frame. It's great, so it's one of our ads.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more, Kat, or no? We don't? Okay, so we have a whole, we don't. Okay, so if you are interested in checking out these podcasts, which I know you are, you can scan these QR codes and be connected immediately to each of these podcasts. I want to thank all of our panelists, Al, Layla, Dayvid, and Dayvid, for joining us here today at East Las Vegas Library Podcast Summit and Mixer, second annual. And thanks to Kat and Morgan and the team here at East Las Vegas for putting this thing together. We wish all of you a wonderful day of connections and epiphanies and inspiration. And I'm going to close it out. Is that right? I'm doing that. I'm closing us out.
With a song?
With a song that I'm not singing. Thank you so much, Kat, and guests. A big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you doing your expertise.
So, as we just were talking, I'm Dayvid Rosen. I host the Piecing It Together podcast. This is a podcast about movies and what movies inspired them. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about being guests on podcasts and why that's a really important thing to do, how to get into it, and how to make the most of it, basically. A little bit more about me before we get into the topic at hand. I've been hosting Piecing It Together for 8 years now. Overall, I've been podcasting for 9 years. I started another podcast with a friend and then kind of spun off into doing my own show, Piecing It Together. I've also produced a number of other shows as well.
Sorry, what's the class name for this one?
Be Our Guest.
This is for guest. Thank you.
Yes, I've been podcasting for 9 years overall with both shows and then with other shows that I've produced. Before I was podcasting, I was a music composer. I also run Wax Tracks Records, previously with my family, but I took the store over last year, so now talk about balance. Now I'm going to balance a lot of stuff. But and the reason why I picked this topic to talk about here, not only do I think it's really important, but I have been a guest on 150 shows at this point over the last 9 years. I mean, it's just been a nonstop kind of focus of me in this business. It's a way not only to connect with different podcasters, put myself out there into the world as an expert in what it is that I talk about, whether it's movies because of my podcast, or music because I was a composer before I started, or even records because I run a record store, or podcasting itself. I've been on a number of podcasts. Talk about podcasts. Yeah, we can close that. I think they said that we need to keep the door stop in it though, just so it doesn't end up locked. Yeah. So
we can escape, it's just getting in.
Yeah, okay. Well, they'll get us that one, I'm sure. They'll break something. So yeah, even talking about podcasts on podcasts has been something that I've done many times, because obviously doing it for as long as I've been doing it, I picked up a few things that I could kind of share with people. So yeah, that's why I thought that this would be a good thing for me to be talking about today. So, the main reasons I kind of locked in on as to tell you all why to guest on podcasts. I mean, I said it in there, and I'm going to repeat it again. It's fun. It's just like a fun thing to do, because assuming you really do love the thing that you're talking about on your show, I mean, why wouldn't you want to do it? You're having people on your show to talk about these things. For me, movies, whether you're talking about music, whether you're talking about art, whether you're talking about literature, whatever it is that you podcast about, supposedly you love that thing and you want to talk about it, so you're going to talk to other people about it. It's a fun thing to do. But establishing yourself as an expert is probably the number one reason why you want to do this, because you want to be heard. When you think of the people that are experts in your field, you are thinking about people that you have seen their name, you have heard them speak before. You want people to hear you speak. You want people to think of you when they think about that. And maybe they haven't listened to your show yet, but they're listening to these other shows and they hear you and they say, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. Right off the bat, you just found yourself a new listener, somebody who is going to be interested in what you do. But then, aside from the establishing yourself and the fun, the other thing is growing your network. Because anybody who you guest on their podcast, they're going to be on your podcast most likely. You're going to connect with the previous guests of their podcast. You're going to connect with other people associated with their podcast. All these people are going to be in your network. Whether it's to be on their shows, whether it's to share ideas and helpful advice on how to be a podcaster or how to grow as a podcaster, all these people are going to be super important people for you to know in the future. They might hire you for jobs. They might want you on their show. You might actually start a whole other podcast with them. There's all these people that are out there, and they're all people worth meeting and getting to know. And being a guest on a podcast is going to put you in touch with those people and get you to interact with all these new people who will become part of that overall network going forward. So, I mean, these are really the big ones. I put it as a smaller kind of bullet point SEO. I think that that's in 2026 maybe a little bit overstated, but at the same time, episode 26 of blah, blah, blah podcast featuring your name. There's another website with your name on it. So it is more SEO. So I think that's great. That's good stuff. So.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt. Everyone should have received your handout in their yellow folder.
Oh.
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes. Is this one?
That's me.
Yay!
All right.
Okay. Perfect.
Put it in the magic. That brings us to the obvious question: how do you find these opportunities? And so there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and there's no one size fits all answer. But literally, the number one thing that I want to kind of leave you with, and it's kind of the one that I think we kind of have to start with here, is just read that. That is number one, because all of these people, now granted, you're probably not going to get a hold of Joe Rogan or one of these people on the first try. You might get them on a good day, but other podcasters in your field, they need guests. Just like you need guests on your podcast. They all need guests, and they are open to you as a guest. They want you, they need you. So you're not bothering them, you're not too small to get in touch with them. They need you, whether it's because you're awesome and interesting and somebody that they really want to talk to, or because they need content. You know what I mean? They need more people. They need more episodes. They need you to reach out to them. So first and foremost, do not be scared about reaching out to people. All they can do is say no or does not respond, but a lot of them are going to say yes. And I mean, over the years that I have been guesting on podcasts, a lot of that has been just from simply emailing podcasts that I have listened to. Some of them are the same size as me, some of them are much bigger than me, some of them are smaller than me, but just reaching out. Now, reaching out could mean finding their contact info on their website and emailing them. It could mean social media, getting in touch on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. Regardless of where it is, just reaching out is like step number one, because most likely everybody in here, you came to this particular talk, you have podcasts in mind that you would love to be on, that you think would be a perfect fit for you and what you have to say and what you have to offer. Get in touch with them. And if they haven't answered yet, always get in touch again. Like, there's no rules against that kind of thing. You can just keep trying to get in touch with people because they do eventually need you to be on their show. But aside from traditional social media, there's also a lot of groups out there, whether it be Facebook groups, Reddit, things like that, where people are looking for guests actively. And they will do weekly or sometimes even daily threads of like, introduce yourself, say what you are looking for, or say what you want to be a guest on, and you can connect with people that way. It's a much more broad version of the idea of reach out to your favorite podcaster, but there are people out there who are waiting to hear from you. And again, bringing it back to like, you know, the SEO and that kind of stuff, like your name is now, once you connect with people and get on their shows, even if their show is very small, very niche, very, like, there's not a lot of listeners for that show, it's still another thing that's out there with you on it. If you are speaking on a podcast, you are putting yourself out there, and other people will hear that, or even if they don't hear that, even just you being able to say, hey, look at this podcast that I've been on, it's establishing yourself. That's really what it is. It's all about establishing yourself and putting yourself out there. So it really doesn't matter the size of the show. I do want to stress that. It's important to be on all different kinds of shows. But after that, there are services out there. I don't want to kind of gloss over them. They do exist. I know I jotted down Podpitch, Podmatch, Podcast Guests. These are services. I believe they have fees attached to them. Never done a single one of them. And that's with years of being on podcasts. I've never done that. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't. There could be some great opportunities out there. Look into them, and it could be worthwhile. There are services that will set you up, matching services that will set you up with other podcasts. And they're out there. I haven't reached them only because I haven't needed to. I've found that by just being proactive and being out there, putting myself out there, anytime somebody's on my show, I always make sure to follow up and say, hey, you know, I'm happy to be a guest whenever, or whenever I see an opportunity to be a guest on a show that makes sense for me and what I'm putting out there into the world. I hit those people up and get the conversation going, and it ends up happening. I haven't tried these services, so again, it doesn't mean you shouldn't, but they are out there, and I'm sure some of them are good. Speaking of money, though, because those services do cost money, there is the question of paying to be on a podcast. Again, I've never done that. That is a potential revenue stream for podcasts. I don't know. I don't know if it's really a valid way. I feel like podcasting is meant to be a more open format. It's going back to the original idea of podcast. It's this piece of audio that goes out and gets taken down by an RSS feed and then goes into any player, and it's a free thing. I don't think the idea of paying to play in the world of podcasting is a really good idea. But that being said, those opportunities are out there. And if there was one that really, really made sense for you, if the person who was at the top said, yeah, you can be on my show, it's going to cost you $300, I mean, that might be worth it. I'm with it. That said, I haven't done it, and I've been on a lot of shows
You were talking about putting yourself out there, just real quick, kind of random. What about, have you ever had any adverse situations happen? So you're out there, you're doing podcasts, you're doing them live, and then people are finding you. Like, do you worry about, like, getting doxxed, like, people showing up at your house, like, that kind of thing? Like, I know it's kind of random and weird question, but it goes along with, do you think people should, like, pay for delete me and stuff like that to keep your stuff off of social media and your personal info?
I suppose it does depend on what your field is. You know, if it's something that's a little bit more sensitive, like maybe that might be an option. I mean, for me, I'm talking about movies, music, and podcasting. There's probably not anyone that's going to come to my home over my opinion on, whatever movie of the week. But that being said, it is an out there kind of a medium. I mean, your name is going out there by being a podcaster. So I feel like focusing on that, privacy is important and all that stuff, but like your name has to get out there in order to grow as somebody who is an expert in that particular field. So I do think, if there was a situation where things did get out of hand, it might be worthwhile, but at the same time, I think the way that your podcast grows, your podcast does not grow from posting on social media. Here's episode 17, everyone will listen. Like, that it's par for the course, you have to do it, but that doesn't actually grow a podcast. Growing a podcast is actually getting out there and actually being heard by lots of people that would be interested in your podcast. And so you kind of just have to put your name out there. But again, it really does depend a little bit on your particular field. If it's something that's like, super political or something where you could possibly be ruffling a lot of feathers, it's something that definitely so, and by the way, any other questions around this? Please feel free to.
When you're going as a guest or when you're having a guest, do you have a conversation or some type of, I'm sure you have to prepare in some instance of what you're going to ask them. Mm-hmm. Do you tell them in advance what you're going to ask them, or do they just wing it as a guest? I mean,
it depends on the show, really. So like with my show, Piecing It Together, we talk about a movie through the lens of what movies might have inspired it. And my guests, hopefully, know in advance that that's what the show is going to be about, and they're going to, have watched the movie we're about to talk about, and they're going to prepare some movies that they think inspired it. And the rest of it is a little bit more open-ended, a little bit more just free conversation. But they know that there's going to be that format for the main show. Same goes for whenever I'm on someone else's show. I have, this is a really great opportunity to talk about one of the things I was going to talk about a little bit later, but I'll bring it up right now. In theory, you've listened to that show. You probably should listen to that show and familiarize yourself with the format. Like, yes, we're casting a big net by getting out there, we're going to these podcast groups, we're contacting all these different podcasters that want to guest, all the people you meet today, like you might be on their shows and everything. Definitely listen in advance to at least one or two episodes, just so you kind of have an idea of what to expect. Then, as a good podcaster, you should prepare your guest for what to expect. Like, you should assume that they listen, but at the same time, you shouldn't assume. You should prepare them. Like, this is kind of the general format. We're going to keep it, a little bit free, but this is what we're going to be talking about. These are kind of the main points of what we're talking about. So yes, there is preparation involved, but I also like to keep it a little open. So I hope that answers that.
It does. So someone says to you, come on my podcast, I want you to tell your story.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have to, or somebody here would have to think about, okay, what type of information I want to share, touch on those points, and then be a little bit open for open conversation on how it evolves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Is there another hand before?
So obviously, starting a podcast, you're starting it because you have a passion with it or an excitement towards it. You're doing it because it interests you.
Yeah.
But where does it become the line of having the conversations to rein yourself in about your excitement, what you're talking about, versus focusing on this is obviously the layout of what the show is, and this is what it's going to be engaging to other people. How do you find that? How do you get into it?
Well, that's an interesting thing, and So one thing, and again, I'm kind of jumping around here, but another thing when it comes to making the most of your podcast appearance, something, again, like that last question that I was going to bring up a little later, but I'll bring it up right now, is genuinely paying attention to the guest. And like, there's nothing worse, as a listener and as a podcast guest, when you hear the guest ask a question and the guest responds and answers the question, and then the original host goes, "Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so let's move on to the next question." And like has nothing to say in response to that. Like it's almost like just numbers at that point. And so being genuinely interested in the conversation is really important, and it's a part of like being able to stick it out as a podcaster, because eventually you're going to burn out if you're not really interested in having conversations with people about that topic. So. But then as far as like not letting it get away from yourself and get away from your format and like actually stick to the topic and your actual show, there's multiple ways to kind of deal with that. There's editing, of course, like we were talking about in there. And there's also just trying to balance in the back of your head both of those things, having a fun time in the conversation, letting it breathe, but also knowing that you gotta kind of stay on topic. Because like David Figler was saying over there, you don't want to have an hour or two of content to have to edit down. Yeah, it's too much, and it's really, again, it's going to lead towards that burnout. You do too much. So there's no easy answer to that, but at the same time, it is really about balancing those two things. It's trying to remember, like, we got to move on to point number 2, but being interested, so that way during point number 1, it doesn't get boring. So.
I think just to tie into what you're saying is research, right, and preparation, right? One of the things that I find in my line of work is you don't, in a big room I heard someone say, don't use AI to write your papers, but you can definitely use AI to research your guests and put questions together. I mean, whether it's about a movie, a recording artist, what their next or last project was, it's a simple prompt in AI to say, give me 5 questions to ask Beyonce, right? And whether those questions are good for you, you can say, give me another 5. If you don't like those, if you can't relate to them or something you feel uncomfortable about, right? So you can just keep asking away until you get those questions that you feel that you can relate to and that the guest obviously is going to relate to.
Absolutely, and I will just say, like, I'm a little bit old school. Like, if I was going to interview Beyonce, I'd probably listen to every Beyonce album. And, like, I would not, like, just leave it up to AI, but that's certainly a good starting point, And so I would want to, like, really know what I'm talking about when I go interview Queen Bey. But anyway,
so I have a similar question, but 2 different sides. As a host and as a guest, should we create a slide deck, resume, whatever you want to call it? Here's me as a guest. Here's my background. Here's my introduction. As a host, here's my podcast. Here's my. It's like the same thing. Is that something that you would recommend to create, or?
I think it's good. I think it's definitely good. Now, I personally have it on my website. I have like an about section, and like I could just send people there. So like I'm not emailing a PDF or anything like that. I'd say, you want to know more about me, you can check out my website, and here's where it is, and all my info is there. And it's just a click away, But that being said, yes, having clear information about yourself is definitely good as you're starting to get out into the world and starting to put the word out there. Yeah.
For or as podcast creators or hosts or as guests as well, do you have a professional or even legal expectation to verify the accuracy of what your guests or yourself are saying on your podcast in regards to any topic? And also, in relation to that question, are there any pitfalls that you can recommend us as podcast creators to avoid in regards to having guests on our show or being guests on other shows?
So, and this goes kind of back to that first question I had gotten about like the doxing and that kind of stuff and like privacy, and like it really does depend on your podcast, what you're talking about. I'm probably not going to get in trouble for having a guest on that says something wrong about Marvel movies on my podcast, you know what I mean? But if your show has some kind of moral, obligation to what you're saying, you're putting information out into the world and potentially putting like fake BS information out there. I mean, I think you should have your own set of morals that you should be kind of abiding by. And personally, I think that would be important. I think it would be, even though it's not something I've had to deal with because of my shows being all about just entertainment, essentially. Everything that I've worked on, I've worked on food shows, I've worked on TV shows, movie shows, music shows, but not anything with like far-reaching effects that could potentially damage somebody's line of thinking and something like that. So it depends. That being said, there are releases that you can find online that would, potentially, you could potentially have a guest sign. And I have seen that before, I've signed them before. Things that say you're to the best of your ability, you're going to be speaking truthfully about everything you talk about. I don't know if it got like that far, how that would actually hold up in any kind of situation, but at least you'd be doing some due diligence on your own and trying to do something.
Are you required to have certain disclaimers? Because I notice with certain podcasts, and especially with certain topics, they'll tend to throw in their video at least once. They'll say something like they say something about a controversial topic. They'll say, well, allegedly, of course,
sure,
as just in case something happens. So I'm wondering if they are aware of something that we are reviewing or not. Are they aware that they can or may be sued by a certain person if they decide to be petty?
Yeah.
Or are they just being overly cautious? They don't have to be so specific.
I think some of that's just an attention hook, honestly.
Yeah.
They throw that in there to hook their audience. Sometimes it's legit. Sometimes it's just a marketing tactic.
Yeah, exactly. And like I don't think you're required to do anything like that. I mean, I don't want to give the wrong information, but like I don't think you would be required to do that. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, it could be a good idea, but they're probably just trying to sound more important.
It also has to do too with feedback from your listeners.
Sure.
If they're listening and they're like, well, you're saying that this movie is directed by this person, is directed by that person. Instead, you're now giving wrong information, and it leaves them open to, is this information you're providing reliable? And I actually enjoy what I'm hearing, and also them trolling you, them making fun of you, messing with you in the post. I think you just gotta be strong to either admit that, I did make a mistake last week on this or whatever. But a lot of that is just kind of protection of, this is the information to my understanding, not a guarantee that this is what it is.
Yeah. And I think it's, long term, it's good to be honest, to be truthful, and be, and have verified sources. And, we want to be guests on lots of podcasts. We want lots of people to be guests on our podcast, but we also want to kind of have an idea of who these people are, and so you kind of can get an idea pretty quickly about whether this person is worthwhile to have on your show, and whether there's somebody who's going to spew a bunch of BS or actually have something worthwhile to say. Most people have, really interesting things to say and worthwhile things. So. Moving on to a few other points here, I mentioned that listening to the podcast is really important. And we were talking about like preparations and all that, going over any of that kind of stuff. Definitely for making the most of the podcast, being prepared is definitely important. But at the same time, podcasting is a very fun medium, and like you don't have to think of it like you're about to get interviewed on like 60 Minutes or whatever. Like you're being on another podcast, like you're going to have a fun conversation. Like it doesn't have to be super structured. By listening to that podcast what the kind of setup is like. You have a general idea of how serious, the serious to fun ratio, what it's going to be. So, you just prepare accordingly. And, of course, your basic equipment setup, making sure that all that is good, because you don't want to be person on the podcast that sounds like they're in a wind tunnel. Like, you want to at least have like an average okay microphone with a web camera, and you don't want to like show up on the day of and be like, I'm on my phone, and they were like, "Oh, you need to be on a computer." Like, you want to like follow the, what the guest or what the host has kind of set out for you. So, just all those kinds of preparation kind of things are good to pay attention to. And again, once you get into that conversation, paying attention, it was important before when you're planning and preparing, but it's important during paying attention. Because you want to be, good at being in a conversation. Paying attention is a big part of being good at being in a conversation. But you've gotten this podcast opportunity to be a guest on this show. You had a great conversation. The episode comes out. We're to the point now, like, what do you do with that to make the most of it? To actually, like, have a reason for having just done what you just did. So, first of all, the host will be very happy if you share that podcast. Like, share it with your own network, share it on social media, of course. I have a links page on my own website where it's got a running list of every podcast I've ever guested on. I think it's at like 120 right now. I've got like 30 I still have to add. I haven't gotten so adding that to your mailing list if you have that, adding that to your socials, adding that to your website, all those things. Well, again, it adds a air of like, oh, this person, when somebody gets to your site or reads your mailing list, they're like, oh wow, this person's out there actually doing this thing. They're actually out there talking about this. How do we know what they're talking about? They're on all these podcasts. And so putting every single one of your guest appearances out there is not only great for the podcaster themselves that had you on, they'll be very appreciative, but it's really good for you too. It's another way of establishing yourself out there. And then reciprocating, having them on your show, if it makes sense, you should have them on your show, because then you're just kind of multiplying. You're like doubling what you've just done. You were on their show, and now the other way around. And the same goes the other way too. If you have them on theirs. But reciprocating is super important. And then, like, staying in touch is also, because like I said, this is building a network. That's what you're doing by doing this. So staying in touch with all these people, whether that's on social media, whether that's actually in person if they're local, I don't get out as much as I used to when I was a younger man, but nowadays a lot of the podcasts I've been on are my friends. Like, these are the people that I like, that actually will like meet up for a movie or whatever with, like, people that I did not know before I was on their show, but they were on mine. Like, these people are your network, they are your friends, and like, these people are all looking to connect. I mean, we're in a very strange world post, pandemic and all that kind of stuff, and like, connecting with other people is not as easy as it used to be. But via podcasting, you are actually connecting with a lot of people by doing this. And so, whether it's the people that were on your show or the people that have shows that you are on, these are people that you will probably continue to connect with. You'll probably be on their shows again, because if you had a great conversation, I mean, why wouldn't you want to talk again? Why wouldn't you want to follow up on that same topic as once things have kind of changed in the world, there's more information out there? Or if it's a movie podcast like mine, talk about another movie down the line. Like, there's always reasons to reconnect, and so there's always reasons why you're going to continue to have conversations together. So, question on.
Do most podcast people also share their information on YouTube? I watch some of them, and it must be different editing, or is it just the same episode that is just?
So you're asking about sharing the episode on YouTube versus on?
Well, I watch a lot of YouTube, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. It seems like they're using dual modalities. I don't know what's the right.
Yeah, and this is like, it depends on the podcast. Like, for me personally, I don't do a video podcast. I got into it as an audio medium, and I believe the word podcast means audio medium. This could be a whole other lecture. But, so I'm sticking to audio only, but I do have the show on YouTube. It's automatic. It goes to YouTube with my logo, and it's just the audio with the logo. about. So, but there are some podcasts that, especially if you've got a team and you've got actual crew and all that kind of stuff, you can take the time to edit a video and an audio version. Some podcasts do have both versions. And Apple actually just introduced a new feature that will let you seamlessly switch between the audio and the video in Apple Podcasts. I don't know if it's launched yet. I know it was just announced recently. So
it's still developing.
Is it? Yeah. So, you're supposedly going to be able to be listening in your car on audio, and then when you get out of your car, just literally the same part in the episode, switch over to video, which I don't want to watch people talk. I don't get it.
Just a quick question on what you're saying. So when you're launching, whether you're doing it through Podbean or through Spotify, or whatever, are you launching it all at the same time, or do you release your audio version first and then, like maybe a day or two, release it on YouTube, or you usually release it all at the same time?
So because mine is just audio, it's creating the version which is below it. It's all happening automatic at the exact same time. Yeah, I use Captivate as my host. There's, like you said, Podbean, Spotify for creators, all these different hosts out there, and that's a whole lot of different stuff there as far as being a podcaster. But they're all similar. They all have their pros and cons and all that stuff. I ended up with Captivate years ago. I switched from Blueberry, which is what I started with. And Blueberry was good, but my friend, who it's like my podcasting partner, he had all Blueberry, and so we ended up switching to Captivate. Anyway, that's a whole story. But Captivate's great, and yeah, they automatically will add your artwork to it via the RSS feed, and it just goes right to YouTube.
So speaking of that, I use Buzzsprout, and you can either do it yourself and upload to all the different services for free. If you want to do it for free, you just physically go and create accounts. Or you can purchase a service. It doesn't really matter what service it is, and it'll automatically distribute to all the different notes. You just gotta set it up, but it just depends on how much you want to spend on your podcast. I mean, there's plenty of tools, there's plenty of things to do it.
Yeah.
Video or audio or both.
Yeah. And if this was a more general talk on podcasting, I would tell you that there's no, again, like with almost anything in podcasting, there's no one right answer for any of this stuff. Like all these services are good in their own ways. It's just a matter of finding the one that you kind of like and that fits your particular needs.
But counting the cost too. That's huge because sometimes you have to go the free route. Sometimes you have to pour into it.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, I think we have like another 5 minutes or so, 5 minutes. Any other questions?
So circling back to guesting. So let's say I want to reach out to other podcast hosts, and that initial cold call or whatever you want to call it, cold email, I'm sending. Can you draw some lines around that for me? Like what are like the critical pieces of information, and how much is enough, and what's too much or too little to put into that initial communication? Like, am I just leaving them a hook and inviting them to come back out to me? I mean, is there how much information do I need to put in there to get that process kickstarted?
Yeah, well, I generally speaking, I like to keep it pretty short. Hey, I really enjoy your show. This is what I do. This is my show. I'd love to be a guest sometime. Here's how to get a hold of me, Also depends if this is happening via email or if it's social media, We all kind of have an idea of how to chat with people and make it seem normal, via social media and where we're not typing like a robot or whatever, But so there's different kind of syntax for different kind of usages there, whether it's social media or email or contact or whatever. But yeah, I like to keep it simple though. I like to just say, hey, I really enjoy your show. If you're ever looking for a guest, this is what I do. I also podcast. You can maybe throw in a little something personal about yourself. But yeah, simple.
So you've mentioned how you've been on different podcasts and they all kind of fall under the entertainment umbrella, even if they're different topics. Do you have any advice for myself? I've been on a couple podcasts before, but they're kind of on very different topics that I have expertise in. So in terms of kind of building up your name, and the SEO you were talking about, how do you recommend like finding a way to like bring them all under one umbrella like you have, or is it okay to have specialized information and interest in things that may not always be related?
I think it's perfectly okay to be in totally different areas. I think just making the most of them afterwards, like I was talking about, like having a links page on your website, making sure you share everything that you do, whether it's being on this podcast or that podcast in like totally different areas. I think, even if, let's say, one of your appearances was on pottery and one of your appearances was on travel to Europe or something, like all of that is you putting your name out there. And so it really doesn't matter if it's connected in a way. I mean, even though a lot of mine are movies and music and it feels connected, I mean, they are still very different shows. And so I think, you can still use all of that as establishing yourself as somebody. And also, it doesn't necessarily have to count towards whatever your main podcast is. It counts towards you as this person who's out there in the world doing stuff. And so you are somebody who talks about what your podcast is about, but also talks about this and this and this. You have a lot of interests, I'm a multifaceted person who is into all this different stuff.
So would you recommend going on a let's say, not even something like you have specialized information or interest in, but just something you find fun? Do you recommend going on podcasts just to talk about that, even if you don't have any expertise?
Oh yeah,
just for the fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. Just more things to do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
I have a question for you. Since you guested on a lot of podcasts, you may have been in the circumstance. So our podcast has 3 hosts. If we were to have a guest, would you typically just take one host out so there's not so many people talking, or would you just have 3 hosts and just really practice not talking too much?
I don't think you need to get. Now, I do think 4 is a good max.
Right.
When I do my live shows, because I do live piecing it together shows at movie theaters here in town, usually once a month, and I have a 4-person panel when I do those. Okay. When I'm doing my regular episodes online, I use Riverside, by the way. It's usually 1 hour. But 4 is totally fine. But like you said, you kind of, as a podcaster, you don't want to talk over each other and stuff like that. So it's like, yeah, the answer is 4 is not too many, but be kind of mindful and you're having a good conversation. You're having a good conversation with yours.
All right, so that does it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed the main panel and hope you enjoyed what I was able to capture of my class called Be Our Guest, talking about how to be a guest on a podcast and how to make the most of guest appearances, which, speaking of which, if you ever need me for your podcast, do get in touch. I've kind of slowed down a little bit lately, only because I've been really, really busy, but I'm always interested in guesting on podcasts, so do get in touch. If the timing works out, I will still absolutely do it. And thank you to the East Las Vegas Library for setting up that amazing event and for having me be a big part of it. It's an amazing facility over there, by the way. A great library, all the things you would expect from a library, but also a great podcasting studio. There's a DJing studio. There's all kinds of stuff over there. Really a cool facility. So go check it out if you're here in Las Vegas. So that does it for today's episode. As always, if you're not already subscribed to Piecing It Together, make sure you're subscribed. You could also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And if you're ever interested in being on an episode of Piecing It Together, get in touch with me. I'm always looking for new people, whether it's to do the online recorded regular episodes or to get you on one of my live panels at movie theaters here in Las Vegas. Get in touch. Either way, you can do that on the website, piecingpod.com, on social at piecingpod. You can email me, all that kind of stuff. Get in touch. I would love to chat with you. So, let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. And, I don't know, what do I play for an episode like this? I just typed into my search bar the word library to see if maybe I'd named a song The Library at some point and forgot about it, but no such luck. So instead, what I'm going to do, talking about a library, I'm going to go to some of my library music. How about that? Totally different definition. Synonyms, is that the right word? Synonym? a music library is a resource for filmmakers to license music from. I have music in various music libraries where they can license my music for a fee. And we're, of course, talking about a library where you take out books and, go and do cool events like this podcast summit. Totally different things. But anyway, whatever. I'm going to play a song that's available for licensing in a music library because why not? I'll go with a track called Daylight. This one I know has been licensed before, so it's even better because we know that it's actually one that has been licensed through a music library. So anyway, this is Daylight, just an instrumental piece, pretty cool, something that could work with like a podcast or maybe a commercial or something like that. So yeah, this is Daylight. Hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by Dayvid Rosen in Las Vegas.